Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Blank Space podcast. Today, we are very, very, very lucky. We have a very special guest, Adam Belanoff, and I'm going to give his introduction. He is a television writer and producer whose career spans more than 3 decades. A graduate of Columbia University, who in 2017 honored him with the IAL Diamond Award for Achievement in the Arts, and USC's MFA screenwriting program. He has written for Star Trek The Next Generation, Wings, Murphy Brown, and Titus, as well as co-executive producing The Closer and executive producing Major Crimes. Outside of the television scene, Belanoff has spent over 25 years mentoring young voices through the Blank Theatre's Young Playwrights Festival, a commitment that highlights his dedication to nurturing the next generation of storytellers. Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
No, I can just die now after you said all that. So let me just thank you.
It is quite
Quite an
the
introduction.
resume.
Well,
I have a question that I just have to get out of the way because I am curious. Your wife is an archaeologist?
she is Allison, absolutely. That's isn't it great? It makes for just such a great pairing because I really feel like if one person's in arts and entertainment, somebody else has to really be smart and have a life that's outside of it.
And
So
grounded,
and
yes.
grounded, yeah. So it's worked out well. She understands what she needs to about the business, but she has just the right attitude of kind of dismissal to the importance
Yes.
of it. So anyway,
Yes.
it's a really good balance.
Oh my God, it must be so fascinating. You must have the best conversations about things.
Well, she's just generally very smart. But yes, if I ever want to ask facts about Chumash Indians or things related to archaeology or American archaeology, she's my go-to.
That is fantastic. Yeah, my husband is a mechanic, so it's
Good.
just really just grounds everything. Sometimes I'll be complaining about the business and he'll be like, "You do understand that A, B, and C," and I'm like, "Right, right, not important. Got it. Okay." Just move it
Here we
right
go. So does that
along.
mean your cars are always running, or is this like one of those things where it's the Schumann, like the cobbler's shoes are always needing to be rehealed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they need to be rehealed, but the soles do get a little more
Yeah.
worn out than they should.
Okay. All right. Well, you always know, no matter how bad it gets, you got somebody you can trust in the house, which I would love to have. I don't
Yeah,
have an
yeah.
account, so
It is true. It is true. So I do have another question for you.
yeah.
What in God's name is going on with Hollywood right now?
Goodness, it's look, I mean, the one constant is change, but these past several years have been remarkable because, as I was getting into the business, there was a strike, and I've walked on many strike lines since then. And, I was around when they were negotiating, VHS residuals and all of that, and then DVDs and then streaming. So, we've had massive technological innovation over these past many years. But I really feel like these last 5 years are really unlike the 25 years that preceded them because the changes that are happening are so significant and sweeping. And, it's tough. I fairly regularly speak with young actors and young writers, and they really, I think, ask that very basic question. It's like, when are things going to get better? And I can
Mm,
only tell them that, like, I've seen sort of every part of this roller coaster. And eventually things do improve, but it doesn't really help if in the meantime you're one of those people who are suffering, kind of just trying to either get landed, or if you've been working to find more work, or all of that. So, I can just encourage people to hang in, and if possible, to try to find as many creative things to keep your engines running and
hmm
tuned. When you can't get it from the business, which is why I really spent a lot of time encouraging actors to write if they have any inclination, and if not, to find other ways. Again, to just remind themselves that you didn't necessarily get in this business to get that recurring guest star role. You probably had a wider interest in the arts and in storytelling. So
Yeah,
really try to keep that as fired up as you can.
it's
But
true. It is. It's a good reminder that as an artist, you should always have a plan B.
Yeah, yeah, and have those other things going. And I think that, I was talking about this just over the weekend with a younger friend. And, I remember thinking before I got my very first TV job, my first staff job, I always thought, well, gee, my life is going to get, so much easier and better when all those things happen. And the truth of it is, it's like wherever you go, there you are. And if you have issues and things that you're dealing with, you'll carry them with you. Yes, it's nice to be able to check off the box when you're working. And so what do we do? Well, just try to keep as much stability, like having a wife who's an archaeologist, and
Right.
and other things that we can sort of depend on. And so we are not completely waiting on the results of an audition or an interview or whatever else, that we can find some contentment and satisfaction in other things.
Absolutely. Do you think, I mean, it seemed like there was a perfect storm there. There we have AI. We
Yes.
have tons and tons of stuff that are on streaming networks instead of the networks that we're used to. And
Yeah.
then we had the pandemic.
I know. I know. And obviously, like the pandemic and AI are two major elements that, were never really, in the mix. We've always had sort of fights between, the artists and the producers and, studios, whatnot, about how much, what the scales were going to be and whatnot. But now we've got, a bunch of really, subverting, destabilizing elements. So, I think we're all to some degree, in the midst still of the tornado and just waiting to see,
Yeah.
exactly what is standing and what the new normal looks like on the other side of this. So, but we get in there, we get through it. So it'll all be
Yeah.
okay.
It will. I mean, when you think back to, the beginning of this business, first it was, oh, we're doing black, there's no sound. Wait, there's sound. Okay, everything's black and white.
Yeah.
Wait, no, it's not just black and white. Oh, wait, now we have television. Oh, wait, now, there's always
Yeah.
been something new that's come along. It's just so interesting. I've been lucky enough to go well over a decade without having huge clumps of time where I'm not working. And my show, the last day that we filmed was almost a year ago. And then unfortunately, we were cancelled in February. And
Sorry.
it's been like really, and that's a very similar story with many, 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 many people I know. So
Yeah.
it's been a very interesting thing I mean, there is stuff filming, but not in Hollywood as much.
Yeah, I mean, there's that element too. We've seen that happening over years. And, from the beginning of time, every actor back to caveman days when, they were kicked out of the cave, thought, gee, when am I gonna, what's the next job? Was this it? But that's our lives. I mean, I think that's one of the things that it's hard initially to accept. And, even 30 years later, I still feel like, it's tough because it's, you can have the intellectual idea that yes, things I will get there, but emotionally, when you're at sea in between these things, and yes, you can get a call tomorrow that could change everything, but it could be 3 months or 6 months from now, and you just don't know. So, I think a lot of being in this business, whether as a writer or an actor or anything else, is living in tension all the
Hmm.
time. And in truth, there's tension from when I turn in a script to when I get notes back. And from,
Hmm.
in the revision, I mean, it really is accepting that, we are in a life of tension all the time.
Hmm.
But I guess,
Yeah.
although we can kid ourselves that, gee, if I had a steady banking job or if I was a lawyer or whatever else, truth of it is that like that this is just life. It may
Yes.
be a little more extreme for us again because, it's such a feast and famine kind of business. Or as they say, you can't make a living, but you can make a killing, right? So it's like, you got a show that runs for a long, long time and you're great, but it's just no telling.
Right.
So
And even then, it's only if you manage your money well.
right,
Most of the time.
right. Exactly. So again, we chose this, and nobody forced us into this business. We all had a passion, I hope, and we had larger intentions of doing something that was going to connect us to people out there. And we're just lucky to be able to do what we do, as tough as it
Hmm.
can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned the process of writing something and then, getting notes and then rewriting it. What is your favorite part of writing a script?
Well, I'd say like one of the things, and it's really speaking specifically about TV writing, is that you are part of a writer's room. And that can be anywhere from, 6 to a dozen people. When I first started in the business 30 something years ago, pretty much almost 35 years ago, my first staff job on Wings, I had almost a dozen incredibly funny, smart guys surrounding me. And yeah, it's competitive and you're always trying to, top the guy next to you. But there's a real joy of being in that environment. And also knowing that, when you run into problems, when you have an outline that you take out of the room and you're working on it and you hit a snag, you can go to any of the brain trust and get help. I mean, on the other side is that you ultimately have very little authority of what ultimately ends up on the stage. You just really have to get used to this collaboration, and that means again having to sacrifice things that you might love, but also sort of understanding that again that's just the way this process goes. Now, in terms of actually the writing process itself, I love rewriting. And it's the hardest thing, I think, to convey to a young writer. As you mentioned, I did spend many years working, with the young playwrights. And in fact, my very first young playwright was I think, a 16-year-old named Austin Winsberg, who I imagine you'll be interviewing, I hope, at some point soon. Incredibly talented guy. Even in those days, it was very clear, just a very smart, funny guy who was going places. And I'm not saying this specifically about him, but just generally writers I've worked with over the years is that, when they have finished a play, and this is probably one of the, or could very well be one of the first things that they've done, they feel like it's in stone, and they're incredibly precious with their material and trying to get them to accept the idea that, first off, that script exists. And no matter what kind of work we do, you'll always have that to go back to. But then to say, like, if it's a joke, you can always find five alternates, and maybe, one or two of them will be an improvement. And I think that I'm going to speak generally here that most of my writer friends feel the same way because, once you have the material, at least in some form, you're liberated again because you have something that's done, and I think the real joy is working and reworking it. And at some point, especially if you're answering a producer's notes and you can't get exactly what they want and you're on your eighth draft and your 10th draft, well, then it's a different story. But certainly, there is a healthy amount of rewriting that's really pleasurable. And again, also, one thing I'll say is that it's also great to have written. I don't know any writer who doesn't love the idea of having written probably more than they love the idea of rolling up their sleeves and looking at that blank screen. But there you are. Much better to be on that other side of it. The same way in school, it's much better to have that term paper written than to
Yeah.
sit down figuring out what it's going to be. So,
Absolutely. We, as artists, especially those of us with like ADHD, you have to
mm,
learn that done is better than perfection because
yeah.
perfection doesn't exist.
It's just, if nothing is, as a writer, no script is ever finished. It's abandoned, right? I
Hmm.
forget now who said that. That's kind of a paraphrase. But it really is. It's like pencil is down, as Lauren Michael, as Lauren Michaels has said about Saturday Night Live. It didn't go on at 11:30 because it was done. Went on because it was 11:30, right?
Hmm.
And that's really the way that it is on television. I mean, if you're on a show that's got 13 episodes to produce over the course of 8 months, let's say, from pre-production or even just the writer's room through the end, it's a train running at 60 miles an
Hmm.
hour. You got to hit your deadlines. And
Hmm.
we'd all love a little more time to keep working, but that's
Oh
just not.
yeah.
This is it's industrial entertainment, and
Yeah.
the same way Ford's got to get X number of cars off the assembly line in a certain amount of time. We've got to get that many scripts and that many shows and all of that. So yeah, you really do understand the business side of it pretty early on in the process.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the reasons I stopped watching and listening to my work because
Mm.
there's always something, there's always, oh, I should have done that. I should have, and I don't do that to myself anymore. I just let it exist and, know that I did it and I
Yeah,
worked on it.
it's
And, there's that horribly uncouth saying of, you have to learn how to kill your babies and just
yes, no, that's it. I mean, you can't. And I remember, in terms of killing your babies, in terms of the writing, I do remember early on jokes that I loved, and I would get so upset and get so resentful. But it is part of the process that you've just got to be able to let it go. And sometimes it's for time. We just got to cut a page, so all that's going to go. And again, it's like got to keep your eye on the long game. It's interesting because about you saying you don't like to watch your work after it's done. I just happened to finish rewatching The Sopranos, which I would recommend to anybody, particularly
definitely.
younger people who can missed it entirely because as long running series go, I think it obviously is a great example of something that was really firing on all cylinders throughout. But I've been listening to this podcast done by two of the actors, Steve Sciarippa and Michael Imperioli, who plays Christopher. Anyway, and they talked to a lot of the actors, and it's really surprised me, and this is just in the last really 2, 3 weeks, how many actors did not watch the show at all. I mean, for the rest of us in the outside world, we've watched each episode maybe, 2, 3, 4 times, and we can, get all these facts. And you hear Edie Falco saying, "Yeah, I kind of remember this episode that I like, and whatever," but just found it just too difficult.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's interesting, and I get it. I suppose if I was seeing myself, the younger version of myself, but also as the actor and the choices that I made, it would be tough. And I think it's probably true. I don't really go back and watch too many of the shows that I worked on.
It's so hard as an actor to know the vision of the people behind the camera. And sometimes
Yeah,
when I'm watching the full episode, I'm like, oh God, if I'd known they were going to do that way, I would have done this a completely different
yeah,
way, you know?
right, right.
But
Well,
as long as people are enjoying it, it doesn't matter.
yes, I get that. It's funny because I watched when I recently did this Fantasy Island reboot. I had some of the guest actors over and to watch the early cut. It was actually the finished cut, but it wasn't going to air for a while. And it was so interesting because there were things that I just had completely forgotten that we'd had to cut and trims that we made or choices that we made. Because I just really at that point was able to just sort of step back and have how the actors were like, God, you cut, how differently they viewed the entire finished product. And I get it. If it was my face up there on screen and my great monologue that had been trimmed in half and all of that, it's tough. I'm
Yeah.
sure it's very challenging.
I mean, there is also, though, I mean, usually when I do see things edited off, every now and then I'm like, oh, but that was so funny. But a lot of the time I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, well, it was for time, or yeah, it didn't really work, or it was funny for us in the room, but it didn't really go with the edit or whatever. But it's so interesting to see, because sometimes you have to, there's a screening or whatever. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, interesting. Um,
Right.
and now I'm gonna fangirl just a tiny bit. When I first moved to this country, I was in university and had a television about this big with bunny ears, and one of the shows that I got at night, I think it was 2 episodes back to back, was Wings, and I absolutely
Uh,
fell in love with it. What a fantastic cast! What a fantastic show!
yeah.
Um, Amy Asbeck right now is one of my most cherished friends. And it just,
Wonderful.
I
Yeah.
like, what a fantastic show. What
It
was it
was
like to
it,
work
it
on?
was an amazing group. And I will say, a real murderer's row of writers. I mean, guys like Ken Levine and David Isaacs, who had come off of Mary Tyler Moore. And I don't know, these days I say these things like everybody would know, the Mary
Oh, I
Tyler Moore
know.
show and and whatnot. And then I've talked to, 25-year-olds who've never heard of Bob Hope. And I think, God, fame is so fleeting.
Oh,
Anyway, he was one of the great, I mean, when I grew up, he was ubiquitous. Anyway, but the group
even though he
was,
doesn't think that women can be funny, but that's okay.
oh, well, I think that maybe Jerry Lewis, certainly, I know said that. I know, did Bob
Oh,
Hope
was
say
that
that as
Jerry
well?
Lewis?
Jerry
Okay.
Lewis, yes. Oh, yeah, he's another character. And I have to Anyway, I won't get into Jerry Lewis, but it was an amazing group. And really, when you think of what those writers, many of them have done since then. I mean, Christopher Lloyd and Steve Levitan, Modern
Hmm.
Family, and just an incredible group. So, on one hand, it was really like, I mean, seriously landing in the big time with
Hmm.
the greats. It's challenging. I mean, I will say that for me, coming out of film school and really having worked in a very solitary fashion for a number of years. Although when I was at Columbia, I worked on this varsity show, it was very collaborative, but still, I'd been for at least some years been like a writer, like in the room, toiling away at 2 a.m. And now suddenly, it's the bunch of you around a table or on couches pitching jokes at one another, and finding my voice in that room was challenging. I mean, I would say that
Hmm.
it took me many months to feel comfortable. And I think one of the things about comedy writing rooms is that often there is a former performer in there, sometimes former stand-ups, that sort of thing. And these
Hmm.
are people who are really used to taking the stage. And then you have people, I think, and I would sort of fall into this category, who are not coming from that angle at all. And so, and it was frustrating because sometimes, and this is really over the many years that I worked in comedy, I would see the stand-up types pitching jokes that I would say were B or B minus. And if I had a joke that was a B plus, but I couldn't deliver it strongly, it was going to lose to that joke, if you will, and get in the script. So, I mean, I think that is one of the challenges, and specific to writing comedy.
On the
Yeah,
sitcom as well.
yeah. It,
And when you're working with someone like Jimmy.
Oh my gosh, Jimmy Burrows, right, for sure. I'm sorry. Well, yeah, yeah. No, he's amazing. What a wonderful guy. I mean, obviously a huge talent, but just one of the most enjoyable
Sweetest.
human beings that I got to meet. So no, it set a very, very high standard in terms of what was going to be acceptable. And I also, although I'd heard about it, I was not used to this idea that one out of every three or four scripts could be entirely thrown out, and we would end up doing page one rewrites, where on a Monday afternoon, we'd have a 10 a.m. table read, and after, 11 o'clock, 11:30, after the network and studio people had weighed in, we'd think, well, we got almost nothing. So you order lunch, you roll up your sleeves, fade in, page one, and there you are as a group, literally going through,
Yeah.
and sometimes you'd work 3, 4 in the morning. Maybe you'd only finish the first two acts, and you'd come in at 9 and finish the next act. But that's the process. Also, live comedy, it's really a tightrope walk. You're waiting for that first laugh, and then you're waiting for every laugh after that. And
Yep.
you just don't know what's going to play and what isn't. I mean, fortunately, you have a bunch of jokes that you have tossed out during the week that you can fall back on, or you come up with new jokes. And I think it's probably one of the most surprising things to a studio audience is just how much can happen between the first, second, and third take of a scene in a
Hmm.
sitcom, as we all would convene together behind the cameras and come up with alternates. Another skill required of actors on sitcoms is to be able to take those adjustments, hear those new lines, and deliver them on their feet. I mean, without
Immediately. Hmm.
exactly. There you go.
I
Okay,
mean, it's
this
the
time. I
best
mean,
of both worlds, though, right? Because you're doing theater, but you're doing television, but you get instant gratification because you hear whether or not something is working because you've got the audience
yes,
right there,
right.
but then it's done in a week.
Yes, no, I mean, and there it is. But then again, it's locked there forever. And I mean, like, the next 20 or 30 years if it works, so that's a good thing. You have to be ready to turn on a dime. And if something isn't working, to give up something you loved on the stage, let's say, and do it. Now, it's funny because you do have to, get used to that fast on your feet kind of working style. I do remember George Firth, may rest in peace, an amazing writer, obviously, of the book For Company, and hugely talented, and Merrily We Roll Along and all that. But he was also a very successful actor, and he was a guest on Wings in its early years. And I remember him expressing to me, and this is a guy who'd been working at that point probably for 40 plus years as an actor, how frustrating it was because, if something didn't work on Tuesday morning, it would be different on Wednesday. And he said, that's a terrible thing to do to an actor. I mean, they're just trying to find it. They're trying to like, every time it's like you're ripping out the roots. As a writer, we're trying to do everything we can to control the outcome. And oftentimes that is like stepping on the actor's own feeling of ownership on things. So I imagine that's tough.
I mean, I think it depends on the actor. When you get actors who have solidly done theater, then
Yeah.
yes, they're very like, but why didn't you just let me try it a different way? But then
Yeah.
when you get people who have solidly done television or have done a lot of television, they kind of get it, and it's kind of like, okay, well, I guess that didn't work. But then there are sometimes I remember I don't remember if Jimmy was directing this episode or not. I think actually that I think Kelsey was directing it, and we had a table read,
Right.
and we came back the next day and it was a completely rewritten script. And one of
Yep.
the actors who had been heavily featured in the first script was now not heavily featured in the second script. And
Right.
he really
Sure.
thought that it was something that he was like, oh my God, I didn't do a good enough reading and da da da. And I went to the showrunner and I was like, what happened? And they were like, it was so funny, but it just didn't make sense with what we were trying to do with the episode. And it was that simple.
Yeah, I get it, and I understand why the actor would think, "Oh my gosh, it must have been my failing that the rewrite had to happen this much, and I lost my part." But I can tell you, I worked with Madeline Kahn in the
Oh,
'90s, and I mean, she's brilliant. Again, another name that I fear younger people won't know unless they watch Young Frankenstein and
mm,
these other movies in which she was so brilliant. But I remember at one point we had to cut a page. It was purely for time. This particular scene was not advancing the plot. And so we dropped it, and I didn't really think much about it. And she came up to me really distressed because she felt like, had she done her part better, that somehow we would have kept it. It really had absolutely nothing to do with her. It was entirely, again, it was not moving the plot forward. I guess we all see it from our own very specific perspective.
how do you feel about I get this question all the time and it's a weird question. I don't ever really know how to answer it because I just think work is work and I enjoy what I do. But how do you feel about the writers' room when it comes to comedy versus drama?
I would say that there is an inherent competition on the comedy side, sort of jumping in with that next joke that really sets the tone in the room. And in that way, it can be very daunting. Unless you're one of those people who can just excrete jokes and really good jokes on a regular basis. And those people exist. But I mean, that's really the currency for the most part. There are people who really spend a lot of time sort of cogitating and really thinking about story stuff, and they are not going to get the spotlight in that kind of room as good as they are. So that's one thing. I will say that it was not dissimilar. The drama room, which was really the second half, has been the second half of my life. Those guys, although were writing a drama, were incredibly funny as well, and there was a lot of laughter. But just generally, the tone is different, and also, the fact that on a 1 hour drama, you are not doing this. You are not doing rewrites on a daily
Mm-hmm.
basis of a script where you are continually churning. And a lot of that's just, I think, the practicality of it because, if you're on a 1 hour drama, let's say it's a show like The Closer, where you've got a 7.5 or 8 day schedule and you're going to be out for 2.5 of those days or 2 to 3 of those days, and you've got to lock in your locations, and each location requires, permits and everything else. You couldn't do those kind of rewrites because you just can't flip the script, if you will, on
Mm-hmm.
your designers and your location people and your transportation people and all of that. So although there will be some dialogue changes within scenes after a read through, you don't have that. So you don't really have that particular pressure. My brother was a finance guy for a long time. I guess he would say that like comedy rooms are more like stocks and 1 hour rooms are more like bonds. Things move, you're both dealing with like very heavy consequences. You got big stakes. They do operate on different energy levels.
Mm-hmm.
The room has a different color to them. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say it's just generally, I think, a more sedate place. Yeah. And you don't have those late nights. That was one of the reasons why I think I was very happy to make the change from half hour to 1 hour was because the 2 and 3 a.m. nights that you can really tolerate and are even kind of exciting when you're 26 and 27 don't have the same appeal when you're 41 or 42.
Right.
that
And it's
sort of thing.
opposite for the actors for anyone who's listening.
Yeah.
Like if you come
Oh,
from like the 1 hour drama, you are working, you're getting there early in the morning, you're leaving late at night, you're not going to bed because you're kind of waiting. You're like, okay, what's the call time? Can't go to bed till I know the
yes.
call time. And then you go to bed and you're waking up at like 5 a.m. so you can be there for 6. And it's the opposite on when
Yeah,
you
no,
do
it's true.
like like
the generally the 5 day schedule. We're talking four camera comedies, obviously, which is like The Big Bang
right.
Theory, as opposed to like A Modern Family, which is shot a single camera. But on Monday, let's say, you have the actors are there for a table read, so basically an hour with bagels and lox and all of that stuff. They'll come in relatively early on Tuesday to put it on its feet with the new pages and whatnot, and they'll do a read through for the producers, usually like 3 in the afternoon, and you know this. And then it's like, Wednesday, same thing, changes. Yeah, and it's either all like really reasonable days, and then obviously like Friday, or the fifth day, because sometimes it's a, Wednesday to Tuesday shoot schedule. But Friday, you rehearse, and then, you have a show, and that night going to be all about getting it on film or video. So the actors will have 3 weeks and a week off, and then the writers will be continue grinding, and just to sort of keep up with the pipeline, because we tend to shoot material faster than we can develop and process it through from beginning to end. As an actor, you're waking up on a Monday morning at 5 to be like on set, to hit makeup at 6:30 for a walkthrough at 6:40, and then it's 7 o'clock. You get touch-ups and do your costumes and whatnot. And 7:30, you start to shoot, and it's 12 hours plus lunch, and the next day you'll start probably an hour later, and then so that by Friday, you're working 12 or 13 hours, but starting now much later, and sort of noon to midnight or whatever else. You were there or in your trailer for
Hmm.
5 days, particularly obviously if you're one of the leads, right? When Kira Sedgwick, was on The Closer, she was in virtually every scene. It really became a thing trying to write material that didn't include her, but the audience loved her and they wanted her and they wanted her in the center of the things. And, so she was not going to get a tremendous amount of time off. Again,
She
I
was
think,
such the way that she played that role
yeah,
was
she's
so
brilliant.
opposite to how anyone else would ever have read that and played that role. And she's just so
She is
unique.
tremendous, and obviously she had that to do that Southern accent, which I think most people say she really, really dialed in well. James Duff, the creator of the show, is from Texas, and he's got a pretty strong Texan accent. And I think it was important to her that she have that sort of Georgian accent and get it right. But she was continually learning material. She's shooting on Monday while she's learning, the 7 or 8 pages for Tuesday and whatnot. Her own method was she would put everything on a tape, and she would listen to it so she could like be on her exercycle or on her
Uh-huh.
treadmill and be listening to it, and it was a system that really worked for her. But technically speaking, just incredible. It was literally cry out of this eye on this line, and then out of your left eye or on this line. She the thing is, as on a show that's filmed, you will end up doing this scene from whatever it would be 7 to 15 times, because we're on you in a master, and then we're on you in a medium, and then we've got your close-ups, and then we're over your shoulder, and we're doing it again and again and again. Every take was usable, no matter where the camera was. She could
That's
really,
amazing. And
it
she's
really, really
an
was.
actor that makes it easy for the editors. So they're like, oh gosh, she's got her
Yeah,
hand in the same place.
exactly.
Thank God.
Exactly. And she was always just so well prepared for actors who might be watching this. Although it seems, I think, probably before you start out, yeah, you're always going to be on top of it. I can tell you that a number of times throughout my years in 1 hour drama, we had people who weren't prepared. One of the most distressing times was we had an actor, an award winner, let's say, and he was gracious. He showed up on his first day of what was, I think, going to be 6 episodes, and he was warm and friendly. And I told him how much I loved him when I'd seen him on Broadway 25 years before and all of that. And it became very clear that he had not only memorized the material, I don't think he'd read the material before. He was at a place, I think, where he would take like these guest starring roles, and it's so hard to tell, to tell you this, but we literally, I think it was 6 episodes. I think we got rid of him after 3 or 4. After the first day, we said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We'll call this person 2 hours early so that they can run their lines with a PA. It doesn't speak at all to this person's talent, But it was just the fact that, as you know, there's 100 people standing around, and
Gotta make the
you
day
know,
move.
it's got, yeah, exactly. We got to finish this scene at 11 so we can move across the stage and be reading the next one at 11:10. And, there's a story, it goes back many, many years. I believe it was the director of Lady Sings the Blues, and I think Berry Gordy was producing. They got a shot, and then they were waiting and waiting to start the next one while he was sort of thinking and thinking and thinking. And I guess it was Berry Gordy who pulled out $100 bill and lit it on fire. And the director said, "What are you doing?" And Berry Gordy said, "Same thing you're doing." But the idea is that literally, you're burning $100
Time is
every
money.
every couple minutes.
I did guest stars as like on 60-minute dramas, and then I went to comedy, and then I went back to drama as a guest star from series regular and comedy, and I felt like I was wasting people's time, like I was just like, and then I got a series regular, and I was so prepared because I was like, I just want to say my lines and leave. Like I was so aware that like I didn't want to stop the day, and it
Yeah.
took me a few episodes to be able to be like, okay, no, I get my time and I get to, but it is true. And not everyone is the lead on that show was able, he was a soap opera guy. So he could
Hmm.
get to work in the
Yeah.
morning and memorize his lines in the makeup chair and be perfect. But that is a skill that
Yeah.
most people do not have. I
Yeah,
don't.
no, it is. And if you're able to do that, I would say, like, keep the secret to yourself, and do it, and don't let anybody know that you just did it. There was a joke actually in this podcast I was watching with the Sopranos guys, with Edie Falco, apparently has virtually a photographic memory, and set 2 alarm clocks. There were a couple of times I can think of where people, and it really is just a couple of times, but literally didn't make their call. In one case, they couldn't. This young actor, she was sleeping at her parents' house, and so they tried to call her at her place, and it was a mess. It was just a mess, and you don't want to be that person. It's just a terrible thing to wake up knowing a bunch of 100 people at a soundstage across town waiting for you. I guess you probably have to learn as an actor how to balance that pressure. Like, I've got to get it on this take, but also to be able to know, like, if I blow it, it's not the end of the world, and like,
Right.
just give it your best effort.
And also, if you are prepared with what you do, all you have to do as an actor is go and do it. It took me a long
Mm,
time to remember that, there are producers and there are writers and there's a director, and they're going to let me know. Because I would leave sometimes being like, I don't think we got it. And it's like, they would let me know. They would let me know if we
mm,
didn't get it. We're moving the day
yeah.
along. It's fine. Don't beat yourself up. Go in there. Remember, you enjoy what you do and enjoy what you do.
Yes, yes. And look, I guess there's got to be a lot of trust that the people who are watching in Video Village and the director actually are going to protect you. So if they feel like you can get something better out of this, just having to watch an old interview with Tony Curtis, great movie star of yesteryear, talking about filming Some Like It Hot, where Marilyn Monroe was showing up sometimes 4 and 5 hours late to things, and the way it shook out was that Billy Wilder pulled Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon aside and said, "Listen, first time she gets her lines right, we're going to use that take. So you got to make sure that every take that you do is usable, because I don't care if your fingers up your nose or you're scratching yourself or whatever else. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
game.
It
That's the
is
game."
the game, and it's one of the one of the things that I was used for when I was on Castle was like speak faster, and I would be given, these monologues, you've written them, those monologues that are just about information. They have nothing to do with my character. I have no idea what any of it means because I don't know how to hack a computer, and I just am moving the storyline along, and I just got to get the lines out as fast as possible. And sometimes that would be my note. My only note would be
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I've heard some directors say that that's really all pretty much they feel like they should be giving actors is faster or slower or bigger or smaller, and everything else it's really the actor's call. So
It really does depend on the magic of the group. And it seems like you have worked on a lot of shows where there is a magical group of people coming together to make something really good.
I mean, I've been lucky that there's always a really talented room. The general feel around the stage and everything else about the show really tends to come from one person or the couple of people who may be running it. And I was incredibly fortunate, and I'll say this every day, that James Duff, who's a tremendously talented guy, created The Closer and Major Crimes, and we worked on several pilots together and whatnot. Not only really talented, but just a incredible human being, truly,
Mm.
like somebody very generous. And, he would not, I think, permit sort of backbiting and backstabbing and those kinds of things. Something else I thought about while we were talking a moment ago is that, in that original group, there were veterans. And I think, Kira was definitely one of those. And we had like Tony Dennison, tremendous actor, but older, who really experienced all the ups and downs of the business. Same thing with G.W. Bailey, who played Provenza, who's sort of the oldest of the group. And we had a younger actor who his first TV audition was getting this regular role on the show, coming off a lot of heat from New York. And I don't think he appreciated, I imagine he might even say this now, just how lucky he was. I mean, the idea of doing, one audition and getting not only a regular role, but on a show that turns out to be a huge hit. And I do know that, at some point, these older guys pulled him aside and said, people get disappeared from this business for not being easy to work with. You got to treat people, and that means everybody, from the person bringing you your eggs in the morning to the director, really well. I mean, that's something else I think is really important to understand. People want to work with people who are easy to work with. I mean, one of the things that I sort of take with me when I go from, to jobs or, when I'm interviewing to work or have interviewed to work on shows is the idea that primarily my job is to make the life of the showrunner easier. And I would imagine it's probably the same thing for an actor. Obviously, it's about the performance and getting there, but you want to feel like you're making their lives on a day-to-day basis easier than it would be if they hired somebody else. Friend, a very talented writer named Mike Saltzman, told me very early on there are three types of people in a writer's room: the person who pushes the rock up the hill, the person who watches other people pushing the rock, and the person who sits on the rock that other people are trying to push. And I actually sort of come to believe that there's even a fourth person who's someone who's actively pushing the rock down the hill while other
Mm.
people are trying to push it up. You always want to be the person pushing the rock up.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you're thinking and you're doing more watching than necessarily pushing, but you definitely don't want to be the person who is sitting on the rock,
Yeah.
you know, or the naysayer. Not an actor, but I know that in improv, the rule is always yes and. And I think that really carries to sort of every job in the business, particularly in the writer's room. If somebody has an idea, maybe it's not quite right, is there something that I can take from that and build on that? I mean, we've all got to have the sense that we are all collectively pushing that rock. And it's an important, part of the process, I think, to feel like, yeah, this is really about the show and making
Yeah.
everybody else look good. And if I don't get credit, but I help contribute something that makes the show better, then we all collectively benefit.
It's also like, I mean, especially here in Hollywood, there are people who come here because they like the art, and there are people who come here because they want to be famous. And those are two very, very different things. And I think that, before like, 2010, the landscape of who people would work with was a little bit different. But since then, what I've seen is that people who are difficult to work with, you really do not see them again. Does not really matter, with very few exceptions, how talented they are. People
Yeah,
do not want that. It slows down the day. It kills the morale. It's just not. It's not fun. And we are so lucky to do what we do and get
yeah.
paid for it.
No,
There's
it's
nothing worse than waking up in the morning and not wanting to go to set because that one
no,
gets.
it really is true. One of the scary things I think I learned really right from the first job was that the business really feels like high school. It can be a big high school, but we all kind of know, somebody who knows somebody. The connections are really fairly tight. When a director is like fired off a show, the business finds out incredible, or whatever. If you lose a job or you have a reputation, and I think even probably accelerated now with the way we communicate versus with text and everything else. I mean, I really obviously came up pre-internet and pre-text messages and all that, but even if so, it seemed the word got around even in those days really fast.
Hmm.
So protecting your reputation
Yeah.
is important. I mean, look, there's going to be mishaps and things won't go well, and it's important,
It
to
is
try.
important. And I think sometimes people forget this is work. This is your workplace. Let us
Yeah.
all be respectful to each other and let us
Wow.
collaborate so that we're creating something beautiful out of this thing. It's the collaboration that you should really want to be part of. Like, that's the fun part, is the
Yeah.
collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, since I imagine that a lot of your viewership, are actors, and one of the things that, when I speak to actors, I try to emphasize from my perspective as, writer producer sitting in on auditions. And I've worked with great, great casting people, including, Liz Dean, wonderful woman, and very, very deep sort of Rolodex of actors. Is that I know everything is focused on today, Tuesday, 3 p.m., these pages. You're auditioning for her rep company, if you will. You're not, yes, you're auditioning for this part. Odds are, just by the numbers, you are not going to get it because only one of the 10 people or
Yeah.
dozen people come in are going to get it. But we have tons of great actors giving great performances, any one of which could have been on the show. And many times we would have actors in on the closer, 6, 7 times before they got that part. And we would say, and this is, truly sincerely, we love what you did. We think there is a recurring part coming up that we think you would be great for. We'd like to save you for that. It's a larger role or whatever else. But we meant it. And, you've really got to think towards the long run. Again, yeah,
100%. If it
yeah.
was Jeff Goldberg has
Yeah,
like
that was
Jeff
amazing.
Greenberg, sorry, changed my
Greenberg,
life.
yeah,
Like
Greenberg, of course.
he's a good friend
Yes,
of
well,
mine now. I texted him the other day. My brain is
there's a lot of Goldbergs, there's a
but
lot of Greenbergs, but I knew who you were
he
talking
brought
about.
me in for Modern Family
Yeah,
probably 20 times before I
yeah,
actually booked something. And he's brought me in, I think, for everything he's ever cast. And have I booked most of them? No. But I stayed in his mind. And it was the same
exactly,
with Kendra Castleberry for Castle. And it was like it just like it's all these different
exactly.
people. And like you said, it's not it's not that you don't get the part because you didn't give a good audition.
Yeah.
There are so many things that factor into it.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the truth of it. I mean, you may walk in the room and we go, gee, we just cast the daughter, and the daughter's like this height, and you're whatever, all those other things, and here's the husband, and are you going to play with him? There's any number of things that are completely arbitrary and out of your control that could determine literally when you walk in the door. So, given that you have not and are not going to get the role, give it your best shot because again, you're auditioning for the long term. Yes, I know Jeff. He was the casting director with Sheila Guthrie on Wings.
Hmm.
So going back to that, super talented guy, and I bet literally could probably off the top of his head list 1,500 actors if he just literally just started saying A through Z. He just he knows that many people and who would be just right for this. So get on someone like that's radar is
Hmm.
really what this is about, much more than landing this particular job.
Yeah, I think people forget that I'm still amazed that there is no award for casting directors because, I mean, you look at something like, let's say, Lethal Weapon, where they were not looking to cast a black actor in the role that Danny Glover got. And the casting director fought and fought and fought for him to get that role. And now, can you think of anybody else playing
I
that role?
know. It's amazing, and that's why we were very flexible. I mean, sometimes writers, as a writing too, will put some kind of physical description, but it was really, I think, our thing, and then probably, we weren't the only show that thought this. Is like, how can we look at each particular role? Is it very key that
Hmm.
that it be a particular person in that way? I actually think I could be wrong, but that the Academy Awards might be starting a casting award. Is that possible? I don't know. I have to look that up. I
Oh,
know
I
that was.
hope
I
so.
know that was certainly an issue. And yes, absolutely. Casting individually, casting an ensemble. I mean, it's tremendous. It's tremendous talent. One of the things when I'm talking to people about the business that I always am trying to emphasize is that everybody truly on the show is part of the storytelling process. That the costumer, by that choice of costumes, is making a huge choice of how the
Hmm.
story is going to play. Same thing for the production designer. A
Hmm.
little change that they make will really affect the way that you think of that scene and the show and that character and the situation. I mean, it isn't just about can I get this costume manufactured in time for this amount of price. They are really thinking about the story, and so
Yeah.
these are all very creative jobs.
Yeah, and it's every single thing is a part of the puzzle. right? Every single thing is an important piece. Okay, I want to ask you kind of a frivolous question just because I'm curious to hear your answer. How do you feel when an actor says my character would never do that or my character would never say
Well,
that?
I personally, I don't think I've heard that. And I know that, like, Stephen Bochco, when one of the actors, I think NYPD Blue or one of the shows, said my character wouldn't say that, and he said, "What makes you think it's your character? It's my character." It was the response. And also, I think when he wanted to shut that down even more quickly, was like, "Yes, he would say it. It's right there. That's what he says." So he would say that. I don't
Hmm.
know. You know what? I mean, I understand why an actor, particularly an actor who has played a particular role, feels ownership, and
Sure.
they may understand this part. I mean, after 5, 6, 7 years, Kira Sedgwick really understood Brenda Lee Johnson, and probably in a way that James Duff, who created the character, didn't. But fortunately, she was never an actor who would have said that. Like, I guess there's inevitably going to be some kind of tug of war. Fortunately, I think virtually all the shows that I've worked on were ones where when actors had issues about, things, rather than saying, like, I know this and you don't. If they say, like, my character would not say this, well, what would your character say? Okay, let's think about it. Let's talk about it. If I have to, I'd run it up the flagpole. This is what GW wants to say. Can we make this work? And it was a collaboration. Obviously, you don't want to be discounted. If actors have an issue, you got to listen to it, because obviously they really have thought about this. If something
Hmm.
isn't playing, you really do want to know it.
So it's more about the way it's
Yeah, it's
presented.
really
Like, oh, can we work on this line a little bit? I'm not really feeling like it's coming out well, or it goes with the, yeah.
exactly. If it's really uncomfortable, for somebody to say, again, if it's just coming out of their mouth in a way that just doesn't feel right to them. Yeah,
Hmm.
let's talk about it. And so, yeah,
Amazing.
I've had many, many of those conversations.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, this has been a lovely, lovely conversation. Speaking of conversations, thank you so much for your
Well,
time.
truly my pleasure. Thank you for such thoughtful questions. And it's
Oh,
lovely
thank you
to
so
meet you. I hope
much.
we'll get to speak again before too long.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been wonderful. And for all of you who are listening, thank you for listening. And don't forget to find that thing that makes you happy today, that little piece of art that makes you feel full and like you've been seen or heard, or just makes you, put a smile on your face. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.